You are sitting in a meeting and you say something that lands wrong. The room shifts slightly. A few people exchange glances. Nobody says anything directly, but you feel it immediately and completely. A wave of something that is physical as much as psychological, a tightening in the chest, a flush of heat, a sudden acute awareness of your own presence in the room that wasn't there a moment ago. Or you post something online and you check the response more times than you intend to. Or you walk into a room full of strangers and feel an invisible social force that is difficult to name but impossible to ignore. Or you replay a conversation from 3 days ago at 2 in the morning, cataloging what you said and how it was received with a precision that you would never apply to any other domain of your life. You probably think of this as a quirk of your personality. Maybe you describe yourself as someone who cares too much about what others think. Maybe you find it embarrassing. Maybe you have spent time trying to eliminate it. The research suggests it is not a quirk. It is not a personality flaw. It is not something that therapy was invented to fix. It is one of the most ancient, most powerful, and most consequential systems in the human mind, a system that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in an environment where what others thought of you was not a matter of social comfort, but a matter of survival. Understanding why you care what strangers think of you is not simply an interesting psychological exercise. It is one of the most practically significant things you can learn about how your own mind works because this system shapes your behavior, your decisions, your emotional life, and your sense of self in ways that you are almost certainly underestimating. Let's begin where all evolutionary psychology begins, with the ancestral environment. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, human beings lived in small, stable groups. The numbers vary by estimate, but most researchers put the typical band size at somewhere between 50 and 150 individuals, a range that the anthropologist Robin Dunbar has made famous through his work on what has become known as Dunbar's number. These groups were not casual associations. They were the total social universe of every individual within them. You were born into your group, you lived your entire life within it, and your survival depended on your continued membership in it. In this environment, social exclusion was not a metaphor for emotional pain. It was a death sentence. An individual expelled from the group in the ancestral environment faced predators without the protection of the group, faced food scarcity without the collective hunting and gathering of the group, faced illness without the care of the group, and faced the existential aloneness of being a profoundly social species in an environment that was genuinely hostile to individual survival. The data on isolated humans in traditional societies is stark. Survival outside the group was, for most of human history, essentially impossible. This created one of the most powerful selection pressures in human evolutionary history. The individuals who survived and reproduced were the ones who were good at maintaining their standing within the group. The ones who were sensitive to social cues, who could read the room, who noticed when their behavior was generating disapproval, who cared about their reputation and adjusted their behavior accordingly. The ones who didn't care what others thought, the ones who were indifferent to social evaluation, who couldn't detect or didn't respond to signals of disapproval from those around them, were significantly more likely to end up excluded. And exclusion was death. Over hundreds of thousands of years of this selection pressure, the human brain developed an extraordinarily sophisticated social monitoring system, a system that is constantly, automatically, and largely unconsciously tracking signals of social evaluation in the environment, tracking whether you are included or excluded, whether you are respected or disregarded, whether your standing in the group is secure or threatened, and responding to those signals with the urgency that the ancestral environment demanded. That system is running in your brain right now. It was running during the meeting where the room shifted. It was running when you checked your phone for the response to the post. It is running whenever you walk into a room full of strangers. And it responds to social cues in the modern world with the same urgency it would have brought to the threat of exclusion from a small band of hunter-gatherers 50,000 years ago. Because as far as your nervous system is concerned, that is exactly the situation you are in. The neuroscience of this system is now well established and genuinely remarkable. Naomi Eisenberger and her colleagues at UCLA published a landmark study in 2003 using a simple computer game called cyberball. Participants played a virtual ball tossing game with what they believed were two other players. At some point during the game, the other players stopped throwing the ball to the participant and began passing it only to each other. The participant was socially excluded from the game. What Eisenberger's team found using brain imaging was that the social exclusion activated the same brain regions as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, regions that process the distress component of physical pain, showed heightened activity during social exclusion. The experience of being left out of a ball-tossing game with strangers you would never meet in a brain scanner, with full knowledge that the situation was artificial, activated pain processing circuitry in the brain. The implications of this finding are significant. Social pain is not a metaphor. It is processed by some of the same neural machinery as physical pain because for most of human evolutionary history, social pain was a reliable signal of physical danger. The pain of exclusion was an early warning system telling you that your survival was at risk. The brain regions that respond to social exclusion with the urgency of a threat signal were selected because responding to social exclusion with urgency was adaptive. The ancestors who experienced social disapproval as merely uncomfortable, who shrugged off exclusion signals, who didn't feel the urgency that drove corrective social behavior, left fewer descendants. You are descended from the ones who felt it. The work of the social psychologist Mark Leary, who developed what he called sociometer theory in the 1990s, provides one of the most comprehensive evolutionary frameworks for understanding why social approval matters to human beings at the level it does. Leary's central argument is that self-esteem is not primarily a measure of how much you value yourself. It is a gauge of your perceived social standing, a running estimate of how included and valued you are likely to be by the people around you. The sociometer, in Leary's theory, is a psychological mechanism that monitors cues in the social environment for information about the degree to which other people want to include, affiliate with, and value you. When those cues indicate low inclusion or low valuation, the sociometer signals distress, and that distress motivates behavior designed to improve standing. This reframing has significant implications. If Leary is right, then the pursuit of self-esteem is not primarily about feeling good about yourself. It is primarily about monitoring and maintaining your social standing, because your brain is treating social standing as a proxy for survival probability. The anxiety you feel when you believe others think poorly of you is not irrational sensitivity. It is your sociometer detecting a potential threat to your social standing and generating the motivational urgency to address it. The sociometer runs continuously and largely below conscious awareness. You don't choose to care about social approval. The system does its work before you have any opportunity to evaluate whether caring is appropriate in this particular modern context. The flush of embarrassment after saying something that landed wrong in the meeting, the compulsive checking of the response to the post, the middle-of-the-night replay of the conversation, none of these are chosen. They are the outputs of a system that is older than conscious choice, operating in an environment it was never designed for. This connects to what is perhaps the most important insight from the evolutionary study of social behavior, and it concerns the specific emotion of embarrassment. Many people experience embarrassment as one of the most painful and least useful emotions available to human beings. The feeling is intense. It is triggered by situations that are often trivially minor in terms of their actual consequences, and it serves no obvious practical function in the modern world. But from an evolutionary perspective, embarrassment is a sophisticated social signal with a specific and important function. The research of Dashiell Keltner and colleagues at UC Berkeley has shown that embarrassment displays, the characteristic behaviors of blushing, gaze aversion, nervous laughter, touching the face, looking downward, are reliably interpreted by observers as signals of social concern. They tell the people around you that you care about the group's norms, that you take the social contract seriously, that your violation of a norm was unintentional, and that you recognize it as a violation. Keltner's research has found that people who display embarrassment are rated as more trustworthy, more pro-social, and more likely to be good community members than people who show no embarrassment in situations that should generate it. The person who violates a social norm and shows no embarrassment is perceived as dangerous, as someone who doesn't care about the group's rules. The person who violates a norm and shows clear embarrassment is perceived as someone who cares about the rules and can be expected to follow them in future. Embarrassment, far from being a useless vestigial emotion, is a reputation management signal. It is a communication to the group that you are not a threat to social cohesion, that your violation was an accident rather than an intention, and that your membership in the group remains an asset rather than a liability. The pain of embarrassment, from an evolutionary perspective, is what makes it work. It has to hurt enough to be convincing. The same evolutionary logic applies to the emotion of shame, though shame and embarrassment are importantly different. Embarrassment is typically triggered by public situations where a norm has been violated. Shame is a more pervasive and more powerful experience of the self as fundamentally defective or unworthy. Where embarrassment says I did something wrong, shame says I am something wrong. And where embarrassment motivates social repair, the research of June Price Tangney and others has found that shame tends to motivate social withdrawal, the desire to hide, disappear, or avoid the people in whose eyes one feels defective. The distinction matters because shame, while also rooted in the social monitoring system, has effects that are maladaptive in many modern contexts. Shame is associated with increased aggression, increased self-destructive behavior, decreased empathy, and poorer psychological outcomes. The evolutionary logic of shame is understandable. In an environment where fundamental unworthiness threatened group membership, the impulse to withdraw and hide made a certain kind of sense. But in modern contexts where most people are not actually at risk of social exclusion for the perceived defects that trigger shame, the emotion can cause significant harm without serving its evolutionary purpose. The social comparison process is another domain where the evolutionary logic of the ancestral environment creates systematic problems in the modern world. Leon Festinger's social comparison theory, developed in the 1950s, proposed that human beings have a fundamental drive to evaluate their own opinions and abilities, and that in the absence of objective standards, we do this by comparing ourselves to others. In the ancestral environment, the relevant comparison group was the 50 to 150 people in your band, people whose status and abilities you knew intimately and who were your direct competitors for resources, mates, and social standing. In the modern world, the comparison group has expanded to include the entire visible population of human beings, and the visibility of high-status individuals has increased exponentially. Social media has created an environment where the comparison targets are no longer the 150 people in your immediate social world, but the most successful, most attractive, most accomplished, and most carefully curated versions of millions of people. The social comparison process that evolved to help you calibrate your position within your local group is now running against a reference class that would have been literally unimaginable in the ancestral environment. The result is a systematic distortion of self-evaluation. If the social comparison process is calibrated to evaluate your standing relative to your local group, but your local group has effectively become the global population of social media users, then almost everyone will evaluate their standing as lower than it actually is in any meaningful social context. The feeling of inadequacy that pervades so much of modern life is not simply a failure of gratitude or a deficit of self-esteem. It is the output of an ancient comparison mechanism running against a reference class it was never designed to evaluate. Understanding this mechanism does not automatically change how it feels, but it changes what the feeling means. The feeling of inadequacy you get when you see someone else's apparent success is not an accurate signal about your actual social standing. It is the output of a social comparison process that is operating on information it was never calibrated to interpret. The practical implications of understanding your social monitoring system are significant, even if they don't involve simply switching the system off, because the system cannot be switched off. It is not an optional feature. It is woven into the architecture of the human brain at a level that conscious intention cannot simply override. What can change is the relationship to the system's outputs. When you notice the flush of social anxiety after saying something that landed wrong, you can recognize it as the sociometer registering a threat signal and generating urgency. When you feel the pull to check responses to a post for the 15th time, you can recognize it as the social monitoring system seeking resolution of an uncertain social evaluation. When you replay a conversation at 2 in the morning, you can recognize it as the reputation management system doing its work. None of this makes the feelings go away, but it creates a small gap between the feeling and the behavior it drives. And in that gap, something like choice becomes possible. Not the choice to stop caring, which is not really available, but the choice of how to respond to the caring, whether to act on the urgency the system is generating or to recognize the urgency as ancestral and evaluate whether it is appropriate to the actual social stakes of the modern situation you are actually in. The stakes of the meeting where the room shifted are not the same as the stakes of social exclusion from a band of hunter-gatherers. The stakes of a post that didn't land are not the same as the stakes of reputational damage in a community where everyone knows you. The gap between the emotional intensity your social monitoring system generates and the actual social consequences of the modern situations that trigger it is enormous, and it is in that gap between what the system feels like and what the situation actually requires that understanding the evolutionary origins of your social anxiety becomes most practically useful. You are not too sensitive, you are not broken, you are not unusually fragile or unusually needy of approval. You are a human being running a social monitoring system that was shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of selection pressure in an environment where what others thought of you was the difference between life and death. The system worked. It kept your ancestors included in the groups that kept them alive. It is running in you now because they survived long enough to pass it to you. The question is not how to stop caring what others think. That question has no good answer because the caring is not a choice. The question is how to live wisely inside a system that cannot be turned off in a world whose social stakes are almost never as high as the system insists they are. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you find this video interesting, please consider subscribing for more content like this.